Hey, UC students, hope you're doing well. Today we are going to be talking about the populist movement. We are still in the Gilded Age, pushing into the progressive movement era, and today we're talking about a movement known as the populist movement. When we're talking about the populist movement, it's important to look at farmers and what they are doing in the Gilded Age. Farmers have problems going on in the Gilded Age, as we've talked about before. They are seeing an influx of new technology, new machinery, which that's good, helps them produce more crops, but the problem is when all the farmers are producing a whole lot more crops than they normally would, that floods the market. And when the market is flooded with crops, the price drops because if supply is high, demand is usually low, and the price on the crops is low. So if we look at corn, starting in 1866, it was 66 cents for a bushel. By 1889, it had dropped to 10 cents a bushel. So prices are dropping on crops, which hurts farmers, obviously. And so these farmers have to keep up by making more crops, but they don't have the money to do so. So they're going into debt. They're getting loans to get new equipment, get new tractors, get new harvesters, whatever they need. And so they're going into more and more debt. Also, another huge issue that they have is railroad companies. At this time, farmers use railroads to get their crops to the market. And railroad companies began to charge huge prices to ship their crops to markets, and the farmers didn't have any options because they didn't have another way to get it there. And so the last thing, natural disasters. This is something that farmers have always faced, and during the Gilded Age it was no different. And droughts and insects or floods or whatever could wipe out a farmer's crop so quickly. And so farmers have issues in the Gilded Age. They are not seeing the prosperity that some groups are in the Gilded Age. Farmers want solutions, and they want the government to fix the problems for them. And so a few things that they want the government to regulate the railroads. They want them to step in and not allow the railroads to jack up the prices for the farmers who have no other options. They want the government to back the dollar with silver. Now this one is important to understand because at the time the dollar bill was backed by gold. And so gold is valuable, it's harder to come by, and so that means there's less dollars in circulation if you have to back the dollar with gold. If you add silver, it would make the dollar worth less because silver is less valuable than gold. They could print more dollars, and when you print more dollars, that causes something called inflation. And inflation means that there's more dollar bills going around. Usually prices rise, but it makes it easier to repay loans. If you are in debt and the value of the dollar goes down, if the dollar is inflated, then when you repay your loan, it's basically like you're paying back less money because you're paying back a more inflated dollar than what you borrowed initially. And so if you're a banker, if you're a person that's loaning money to somebody, you don't like inflation. You don't like for the dollar to be worth less. You want the dollar to be strong so that you're getting back the same or more money than you lent out. And then they also wanted a few things constitutionally. They wanted more checks on the government, like a single term for the president and VP, a secret ballot. At the time, this is big. People were being forced to vote certain ways because they were being blackmailed or bribed, and people could watch and see who you voted for. And also they wanted to get the industrial workers' support. And so in order to do that, they were pushing for an 8-hour workday and to restrict immigration. The less immigrants that are allowed to come in, the more jobs they felt would be available for American workers. So a party is born in order to push for some of these things that these workers, these farmers wanted. And that party is known as the Populist Party, and it came about in the election year 1892. This party was going to represent the common man, people like farmers and workers and miners, not the rich and the wealthy and the elite. This was for the common man. They wanted the government to take a larger role in solving the problems that the common man faced. They wanted the government to step in and fix issues, to make things more fair. They wanted to end injustice that the little man or the common man was having to deal with, and to help solve poverty and help make things more equal. And so it became known as the People's Party or the Populist Party. So here's 8 things that the Populist Party pushed for in 1892. This is their platform. These are the things that they're running on. So unlimited coinage of silver. So we talked about that. They wanted to raise farm prices. They wanted to make it easier to repay loans. They wanted to help those in debt get out of debt easier, and so they wanted to add silver to the currency. They wanted direct election of senators. They wanted the people to be able to directly elect those leaders in the Senate. They wanted term limits for president, which there was not any term limits at that time. They wanted only a single term, one term in office. They want a secret ballot. Workers were being intimidated to vote a certain way. They were being intimidated to vote the way that their boss would want them to vote. And so if they could make the ballot secret, then they could protect against that, because no one would know who you voted for. And you couldn't be bribed or blackmailed to vote a certain way. They wanted the government to take over certain important aspects of society, like railroads and telegraphs and telephones. They said these things are too important to be controlled by companies that are out there to make money. They need to be controlled by the government. They wanted a graduated income tax. They wanted the wealthy to pay more in taxes. Remember, this is the People's Party, the common man. They want the common man to pay less taxes and the wealthy to pay more. Immigration restrictions. They wanted to shut down the amount of immigration coming into the country to keep more jobs available for Americans, and they wanted an 8-hour workday. In the 1892 election, the Democrat Grover Cleveland won the election. You can see took most of the South, a few states in the North and Midwest. The Republican Harrison won a lot of the Northeast, part of the North. But notice all these green sections in here. This is the populist vote. This is the Populist Party getting electoral votes. Not only getting electoral votes, but getting a lot of the popular vote, getting over 1 million votes. That's huge for a third party. So you can see that this third party had a major effect on this election. It had a major following and major support for being a third party, and had a huge impact. So the Populists obviously didn't win in 1892. They did get over 1 million votes. The 1896 presidential election comes along 4 years later, and the Populists have a decision to make. They can run their own candidate out there again, or they can choose to support one of the other 2 candidates, the Democrat or the Republican. And they decide to support the Democratic candidate. His name is William Jennings Bryan. So instead of running their own populist candidate, they went and backed Bryan. One of the main reasons they did this is because he agreed to support backing the dollar with silver, which, remember, is one of their main platform items that they wanted to push for. And so they felt like they should put their support behind Bryan and his push to add silver to the currency in the 1896 election. William Jennings Bryan gives a major speech at the Democratic National Convention. It's one of the most famous speeches in history. And it was dealing with adding silver to the currency, and he calls it the Cross of Gold speech. And the speech was so popular that it got him nominated to become the Democratic nominee, and sent the crowd into a frenzy, and made him very popular, and is studied as one of the most popular speeches in U.S. history. Now, the Democrats and William Jennings Bryan, with the popular support, did not win the 1896 election. He did carry the South and most of the West out here. Notice the areas where farmers are, where you have a lot of populist support. Relatively close in the popular vote, but electoral votes was 61% to 39%. These highly populated northeastern states carried more weight than the South and the West. So the Populist Party rose and fell during the 1890s, but it did leave its mark on our history, and it does show us the role that third parties play in our politics. They often have an impact because they focus around a certain idea or a certain person, and they galvanize people, and they show that there is a need that may not be represented in the major parties. They help give a voice to minorities, and they generate new ideas. And many of the populist ideas that we saw in their platform, those 8 things we talked about, a lot of those have been put into law since the Populist Party fell. So even though the Populist Party is gone, its legacy still lives on, and we still have a lot of those ideas that they brought forth back in the 1890s.